Hey guys, it's your host Julian. This week I sit down with Ian Jones-Quartey, the creator of OK K.O, Let's Be Heroes. This is the first of our two-parter with Ian. During this episode we talk about how Ian fell in love with animation, a little side hustle he had during school using his artistic abilities. We also chat about his time on Venture Brothers as well as Adventure Time. A little bit about him getting to work with LeVar Burton on OK K.O. Yes, the LeVar Burton from Reading Rainbow. Ian was such a cool and kind dude with his time, and I'm super thankful we got to chat. I hope you all enjoy listening to this as much as I enjoyed recording it. Enjoy the show. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Voice in My Head podcast. I'm your host, Julian, and today I'm joined by Mr. Ian. Ian, how are you, sir?
Hey, glad to be here.
Oh, man, I'm glad that you're here, man. So we're going to jump in ladies and gentlemen, we're going to do a little bit of a format because I think this worked out quite well for the couple previous episodes we've done it with. So we're going to get in that metaphorical time machine, that DeLorean, if you will. We're going to take a step back. We're going to go to young Ian, man. Do you remember where you fell in love with animation?
Oh man, I wish I could remember because as far as long as I can remember, I've loved cartoons. Like I feel like I first started drawing when I was like 3. I have like some very early memories of doing
Mhm.
that, but I have no idea what the first cartoons I saw were. It was probably Looney Tunes, just because those were on like every day and they were syndicated in my area. I would just watch Looney Tunes all the time. Some of my like first drawings were Looney Tunes. So I'm gonna guess it was Looney Tunes.
I think for so much of us, because I mean, you're not too much older than me. I'm 33. I just turned 33 this year. So, I got to feel like we grew up kind of with the same sensibility when it came to
Yeah.
cartoons, it came to animation, comic books, movies, any of that type of shit. So I got to imagine for a lot of us being our age, Looney Tunes was like the end, or Tom and Jerry was the end, the
Yeah.
Flintstones, something along those lines.
Yeah,
Uh,
for sure.
so when looking back though, man, do you remember where you kind of started to draw that line was like, I love watching this, but I love drawing this, and this is what I want to do. You remember what
Right.
this was?
So when I was in elementary school, um, I think I was like in first grade or second grade. I kept drawing. I had like a stick figure character that I used to draw like when I was like in preschool. And then I started like adding more to it. And this was like around the time I think Simpsons came out. And I remember I was super into Simpsons. I was super into Garfield, the
Yeah.
comic strip, at the same time too. And I remember just being like, "Oh, I can make a character like one of these characters." And then yeah, I think it was like around first or second grade I made like my first like characters that were like, one of them was like a little kid that was like me and his whole kind of world, and then I had like a bunch of animal characters, and then I would just try to draw like comics and
Mm.
show them to my friends and to my parents. They didn't understand them because they were like off the wall, like you couldn't understand it. It's like chicken scratch from a child, you know what I mean? But that was like the time where I was just like, oh, I really want to like create characters and tell stories. That's like those are like those sometimes there's just like those moments where you're just like, oh, like I really want to go back to that feeling of like discovering that for the first time, you know?
Now, uh, I told you I wouldn't ask you anything personal. This is about a personal question I'll ask you, but do you have kids?
No, I don't. I don't.
Okay. The only reason I ask that is because it's come up so many times. People say, I've had multiple animators have said, you kind of have to have a childish side to be an
Right.
animator. You have to be able to tap into that because that's not who you're writing or animating for, but that's a big part of the audience. You want to connect that younger crowd.
Sure.
We all have that kid. I mean, look at all this shit behind me. I mean,
Yeah.
look at the stuff behind you that's influenced you. I mean, this, like, I come in here and I'm instantly inspired. I'm instantly like, fuck, I remember where I was at when I saw the Turtles for the first time. Remember I saw Plank and Ed, Ed, and Eddie for the first time. I
Right.
mean, there's a spam cam that has no reason to be back there other than I absolutely nice. But it's just insane to think that, we have these shows, these movies, these comic books that, take us there. But the reason I asked you if you had any kids was whenever I'd start showing my oldest son shows or movies that I watched, like I'm watching the show, but I've already seen it 100 times, so I know what's going to happen. What I'm really looking at is like, what's he looking at? Like, is that what I look like? Did I look like a zombie like he looks like right now watching these shows for the first time? So it's
Yeah,
insane to see and connect, to that childlike wonder, but through the
yeah,
lens
for
of
sure.
somebody else, and then he's picking it up. When you're watching these shows and you're creating these characters, I don't know if you ever got a chance to work with him, but I had Chris Battle on not too long ago. He did some Powerpuff Girls,
Mm,
Samurai Jack, Teen Titans Go.
yeah,
And the one thing he said, he's like, growing up in high school and you were the artist in school, everybody wanted you to draw the characters. What was that situation like for you? I mean, was everybody coming to you like, Ian, man, I want you to draw me Batman, or what was that like?
for sure. I mean, like, yeah, I remember being like the kid that could draw in
Mhm.
classes. I remember in like I think it was fourth grade or fifth grade, I got into a racket of it was when Marvel cards were like really
Oh yeah.
popular.
Hmm.
And so I got a bunch of index cards, and then I would like draw, like I would be like, "Oh, for 50 cents, I'll draw you as a Marvel character and like write stats on the back."
Hmm.
And like you can have like your own Marvel card basically. Like stuff like that, you know? And just like all the like weird stuff, like yeah, people would just always be like, "Yeah, oh, could you put my name in bubble letters," or like something like that, you know? That was always really fun. Or just like stuff where it's like if there's a class project about that has like some artistic thing in it, like people would always want to partner with you and stuff like that. It was really fun.
Dude, you were taking commissions at fourth grade.
Yeah, it was really fun. I remember liking it. I remember like a friend being like, "Can you draw like a sexy lady superhero?" And I was like, "I will try." And he was like, it was a big commission source for me.
Yeah? Did you get more than 50 cents on that sexy lady drawing you did?
I don't know. I wish I could go back and look at the ledger. Maybe I did.
Your accountant's gonna come to you, Ian. We need to talk, man. You've got some shit in escrow over here. That's
Exactly.
that's fantastic, man. Before I ask you the next question, man, who was your favorite Marvel, or not Marvel? Excuse me. Who was your favorite X-Man? We'll start there.
Oh, I think I just liked Wolverine, and I think I
Yeah.
was like at the age. My older brother had a bunch of Marvel comic books. At least I think he had some. And I just remember I just liked this character, the
Mhm.
look of it. All the stories went completely over my
Yeah.
head at that age. And I think I just liked the characters, collecting the cards. And then when the cartoon came out, the X-Men cartoon came out, it was just all over. And it's like yeah, I was just like I just would watch it like every day. I
Mhm.
really kind of want to go back to it. I know they're doing like the new version of it now,
Mhm.
but I want to go back to that original show, see how I feel about it now.
There's some episodes that are like, oh fuck, this is hard to get through, but there's a lot of episodes in it that are really good. I had bought the So about a decade ago, I started going on no, a little bit longer than that. 2010 is when I went on my first deployment when I was in the Navy. So I would carry around, obviously you're on a ship, you can't really take streaming services with you. So I
Right,
would have like 3 or 4 binders about that thick of just DVD shows, whatever I can pull with me, right?
right.
And they had the box set of the X-Men the animated series, and I was like, "Fuck, I need to get this one. This one's got to go in here." I remember watching this as a kid, and man, I burned through that entire series and probably the first week or whatever on deployment. But that show was Colossus was always my guy. I don't know what it was about him. Maybe
Right,
it was the metal. I like Wolverine, I like Gambit, but just something about Colossus just spoke to me. Just
right.
big dude, just could smash shit. Right? He had so much more depth than the Hulk, and I can never get into the Hulk, man. Um, but going back to you slinging commissions in fourth grade, you were an entrepreneur before you knew what an entrepreneur was,
I
bro.
guess so.
That's phenomenal, man. The only reason I bring that up is, did you ever watch Dragon Ball Z back in the day?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I was into Dragon Ball when
Yeah.
that came out first.
Deep
And then
cuts.
like when Dragon Ball Z came out, I was like, guys, I've been trying to tell you about this for like years. Yeah.
the only reason I bring that one up is because how you were making money for your commissions, that's how we made that was our currency in school. You would trade. This is when you could go to computer class when we first started we got our first printer in school, right? It's like sixth
Oh,
grade maybe. So you were allowed to print one picture off and it was in color. It started off in black and white, but eventually we upgraded to color.
that's
So
amazing.
we would print off one picture each and then we would all like trade or we would sell the just the thinking that you could sell something and now all you have to do is take out this
Yeah,
little itty bitty phone and you can save it to the phone for the rest of your life. It's just wild, right?
yeah.
So it's
I
just
think I think about that a lot because there's something I think about a lot, which is that like these images, they were so special to us as
yes,
kids. And like when you were a kid and you saw an image of something, you might never see that again,
yeah,
So you like had to like, keep it. I remember like what the stuff behind you right now is reminding me like I had a Ninja Turtles t-shirt and I remember, it came with like a tag that had like the Ninja Turtles
mm-hmm.
logo on it. And I remember like clipping off that tag and like keeping that tag because
Yeah,
like when am I gonna get to like have this like image again? Like I might never see it again. There's no Google image search. There's no like phones or internet. Sometimes like you're just like you have to keep stuff in your head. I think that's kind of why I started drawing because like you'd see things and you just want to like get them down.
absolutely, man. And I'm so glad you brought it back to drawing. When you're doing this, are there certain shows that you wanted to capture more than others? What were some of the shows that stand out that you make sure you want to have a mental and then a physical copy of that show?
I think for me, well, I mentioned it already, but for me it all came back to Looney Tunes
Mhm.
always.
Yeah,
Like those were the shows that those were the cartoons that I watched over and over and over and over. And like when I started getting into animation, when I was just figuring out what animation was, when I was like in elementary school, I found out, I can record these and freeze frame and play them back like frame by frame and
yeah.
see how they drew it and did it. And like for me, Looney Tunes was like it was always like the thing I would watch over and over and over, and I would like digest these things and like really love them and really care about them. And I loved those characters. And I remember thinking, it's just they're just so funny. I don't know how anybody could ever come up with these characters.
Mhm.
And I tried to read, it used to be like I used to just go to the library and any book that was about animation, I would like try to get that book.
Yeah.
Um and I remember like, yeah, I had this like sort of obsession with just trying to figure out like how they made these cartoons. And yeah, I think Looney Tunes was like the one I was like super obsessed with. I bought those DVDs, but they're all in kind of like a weird order and stuff. I wish they would do like a chronological thing.
Yeah.
It's so sad that all the stuff's happening with HBO Max because for a while there they were uploading a bunch of the old Looney Tunes and they have it all by like by year on there too. But they're still missing like a lot of
Yeah.
cartoons. But like, you know, that is like for me, that's like the be all end all absolute height of cartoons. Those are to me like the funniest, best characters, best animated. And it all depends on what you're in the mood for. I would always like default as a kid. I remember I was like, oh, Bob Clampett, like those are my
Yeah.
favorite ones. And then like I remember getting a little older and getting the Chuck Jones book from the library and being like, oh man, Chuck Jones made the best Looney Tunes, you
Yeah.
know? And then like, just growing up and then sort of like liking everything. I remember discovering Tex Avery and being like, his his Looney Tunes weren't as good as I thought the others were, but then his work for MGM was like so good and like so, beyond everything. And yeah, I don't know, just like getting into that was like as a kid, that was like really important for me.
Dude, that's really cool that you can sit there and I'm so glad you brought up Bob Clampett. And before we go down this road, ladies and gentlemen, we'll get to the shows that Ian here has
Oh
worked on.
yeah.
But being
Yeah.
able to delve into, how you got to doing what you do now is just
Right.
fascinating. And it can go for an animator to a comic book artist to a chef to a music. I don't give a fuck, man. It could be whatever. You could be a pirate on Tuesdays that cuts hair. I don't care, man. I want to know these stories because I think it's fascinating. And I'm taking off this shirt, not because we were just talking about HBO Max, but it's for some reason it's hot as hell in this room, man. It's usually cold as shit. Florida's got a little cold spell going on. But I think they turned the AC off because everybody's a little chilly in here, right? But just seeing how somebody's journey starts and then how and what kind of shapes and twists and pushes them in the directions that they, ultimately end up is just fascinating to me. But what do you think it was specifically for you? But what do you think it was about the Looney Tunes that kind of set that bar and nothing kind of matched or overtook it?
I think for me, it was just those characters. Like, I don't know what it was, but and I know this is true of Disney characters too.
Mhm.
Like, especially of that time, those characters have like an internal logic to them. Like, you can see them thinking, you can see them like, you can sort of like almost imagine that they're real. The Looney Tunes were like that too, but they were also funny.
Yeah.
And so like I think that was just it. And I think just like all of the actual animation I just found so hilarious. Um Even though like, you know, they're so off the wall, I think it was just that they were like the funniest cartoons.
Yeah.
And I felt like every cartoon should be really funny. And I had like for several years, I didn't want to see like a live action thing on my television. Like, I was like, if it's a cartoon, I will watch it. If not, I won't. I remember like being a kid and like you're watching Disney Channel and a cartoon is on, and then it's like up next a live action thing. I'd be like, nope, I'm out of here. You know. I remember when I was in fifth grade, we got Cartoon Network on our cable system, and I remember like it was like I it was so funny because like I definitely came from like a family where my mom's like, oh no TV during dinner, like we always eat together. But I remember like that night she was like, okay, there's nothing stopping this, like you're
Yeah.
just gonna be watching
This is
Cartoon
happening.
Network like until like midnight, so she just let it go.
That's so fascinating. And what does it feel like? What is it like to be an Ian, right? So you go from watching the network blossom and bloom and just blow up to what it was and what it is. And, I hate being negative on the show, but what it possibly could be. I really hope everybody's said that it's not the end for Cartoon Network Studios. I don't think it is. I had Fred Cyber on not too long ago. He was the reason that so many of the
Yeah.
shows got made. He greenlit so much of this stuff, and when he was on a few weeks back, he said it kind of happened not to the level of what's going on now, but it kind of happened when Cartoon Network bought out Hanna-Barbera. You had a
Yeah.
massive layoff, you had restructuring and all this other shit. And then you had the same kind of thing with the AOL Time Warner merger in the early 2000s or, late 90s, early 2000s. So he's like, it's always happened. Every company has, kind of cannibalized itself and tried to, out of those ashes, kind of grow back stronger. But for you specifically, man, what has it been like? A kid sitting in front watching that studio logo come across, and then you walking into that studio and saying, holy shit, I work for the checkerboard. I worked
Yeah.
with a piece of my childhood. What does that feel like? Is it weird? Does it feel real?
Oh, it was completely surreal. And I remember like my first days there, I just couldn't believe it was happening, like that
Yeah.
I was actually there. Like I remember like walking in and seeing like, um they used to have like a big mural with all the logos of every show they had ever made there, like on the wall. And I remember just looking at that mural and being like blown away, like I can't believe I get to work
Yeah.
here, you know? And I remember when I started there, it was sort of around the time that I think Chowder had just like they were just finishing. Flapjack was winding down, but they had like a couple episodes left. And I remember like, yeah, getting to meet, some of these people who were the people whose shows I had seen or worked with the people whose shows I had seen. And it was just like, it was mind blowing. And I
Mm.
remember like, yeah, the the point when I was making OK K.O. and I was like animating the Cartoon Network Studios logo and my characters were in the middle of it. It was just like it was like mind blowing. Like, like I used to watch this channel like 24/7, and like I'm definitely in the generation that was like really just primed to like all of their original programming when it was starting. Like literally, I think the year we got it was when like What a Cartoon was starting, and like all the stuff that Fred Seibert was doing. And I remember like just actually stepping into that building and like being a part of it was just like it was mind blowing. It seriously was.
Did any of it feel fake? Did you feel like you were dreaming at all?
I just remember like it just all moved so fast that I
Yeah.
didn't really have time to think it was fake. I was just like, I can't believe I'm here, you
Hmm.
know. I remember uh I think it was maybe the second season of Adventure Time. We had moved like in the building, and we were actually like across every floor at that time had like two shows on it. And I remember I think like Gendy was starting Symbionic Titan maybe around that time. And I remember just thinking like, I can't believe it. This is like a hero of mine,
Yeah.
like down the hall. You know what I mean? Um, it was surreal. It was really surreal.
Hey guys, it's your resident cartoon junkie Brandon Jones here, asking you to have a listen to my Animation Destination podcast. It's an animation celebration podcast, and it's full of all sorts of stuff about anime and cartoons and voice acting and all that sort of thing, and just a really all-around celebration of anything animated. So come on by and check it out. We've got fan episodes of your favorite animes to your most obscure cartoons on Netflix that no one's ever heard of, and just really love talking about it. You can subscribe to us on Spotify and iTunes and anywhere else you can get your podcasts from. So stop on by, subscribe, and stay tuned for the Animation Destination podcast.
I'm so glad you brought up Gendy because the fans know he's Mount Rushmore. Like, so there's a question that I'll ask you when we do our part two. Ladies and gentlemen, you made it this far, so you know there's going to part two coming where we're going to ask all the fans questions and we're going to dive deeper into OK K.O. I want to make sure we kind of end on that note because that's a very fun show and that's a very special show because my kid told the story before, but I kind of got out of animation around 2012, 2013. When you're deployed, it's just you don't have any time to watch anything. You don't have cable.
Right.
I had a kid at that time. So he was just watching, he would watch like PBS, so Dinosaur Train. He'd watch some cartoon stuff, Nickelodeon stuff. And it wasn't until about 2014 when I come home off of my last deployment. I'm on shore duty. And I'm just flipping through the channels and regular shows on. I never heard of it, never seen it, I didn't know what was going on. And my sons go, stop, daddy, stop. So we stop and we watch it. And then, they're throwing up their arms. They're going, whoa, right? So I'm looking at this and I'm watching him. And I'm like, holy shit, this seems really funny. We're watching it. We're having a good time. And then we start to watch this. We're starting to watch it every day. We kind of bonded over this because when I would deploy, I would it would suck just being away from your wife and son, man.
Right.
Not sleeping next to your wife for 9 straight months, not being able to see or hold your kid or give him a hug sucked, man. I signed up for it, so I don't need any sympathy or anything like that from anybody. But it's just like it sucked. I didn't know the ramifications of not only being a husband but being a dad during that time. And getting to see this, not only did it bring me back to animation, but it brought me closer with my son. We had something to watch, man. So when I would get off work, he would know generally what time I would get home. And he would see me coming up the driveway and he would throw up his hand like Rigby and Mordecai did. He'd go, whoa. And I'd go, whoa. And then if I didn't do it, he would fucking run around in circles in the house. Whoa. And it would aggravate the shit out of my, she's like, will you just throw your hand up and go, whoa. So he'll stop, so it was something about that. And like I said, with OK K.O, this was something else, man. It was a little bit later. He's at that weird stage where it's kind of like he's almost a teenager. So it's interesting that he just doesn't want to hang out with dad as much anymore. Doesn't want to watch cartoons with dad anymore. This is the one that we, started watching a few years back. But like I said, when you brought up Gendy, man, he's Mount Rushmore for me. He's if I could put him on all 4 spots in Mount Rushmore, he's on all 4 spots. So you get to hear all the time, us fans fanning out over you, or fanning out over Gendy, or fanning over your wife, or, Craig McCracken, whoever it might be. I got to imagine, with you being a fan of Cartoon Network, literally from day one, you've had to have at least had and fanned out pretty hardcore for somebody. Who would be that one person, or maybe you got two stories you might have fanned out a little too hard for, but what did that fan out story look like?
Oh man, I let's see. I feel like, definitely with, I mean, I was just like super hardcore into Dexter's Lab. That was like when I was like a middle schooler, that was like my show, that was like, I felt like that was like, oh, there's finally a cartoon that like really speaks to me. Um and getting to finally meet a lot of those people was has been pretty amazing. And I've definitely like, yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to think of like any like super embarrassing fan out stories that I've ever had. Really trying to think.
If you don't have an
Uh,
embarrassing one, what's one that sticks out to you getting to meet a hero of yours? Does one stick out?
there is one that sticks out. They're not a cartoonist, but
That's fine.
when I was on OK K.O, um, I got to meet and direct LeVar Burton because
Get the fuck out of here.
he did a guest spot on the show. He was playing his character from Captain Planet. Um, and it was just like, I don't know. It was like a crazy moment. I didn't even get a picture of us together because I was like freaking out like a little too much. And it's one of those things where it's like I had to work, so I had to like be cool about it and like give him the lines and say, oh, we want it like this. But I eventually like, I got him, he like signed my script and we like talked a little bit and I was like telling him how much of a big deal it was, like reading Rainbow and Star Trek. And like I was telling him how much like, oh, him being on Star Trek, I always thought he was so cool. Even though like, oh, I went back and watched it and like Jordy's kind of a nerd. That's kind of funny. And he was just talking about how like, oh, he really liked being Kwame on Captain Planet, and he was like, oh, I want them to do something with this. You're the first person to actually call me in to do this character in like a really long time. It was great. I was like, and I was like freaking out a little bit. And we got to have like a couple Star Trek people on the show. We had Martina Sirtis, we had Michael Dorn, and like, of course I'm like, you know, totally showing my nerd ass here by like having them on the show, but like I was freaking out. That's not a cartoonist, but I was just like super like crazy like happy to actually get to meet LeVar and like hang out with him for a little bit.
That's so cool, man. And so I used to listen. They not used to listen because they don't do it anymore. But Shaquille O'Neal. The reason I'm into the NBA is because of Shaq, right? Seeing him rip the rim down in New Jersey when I was like 5 or 6 years old. I look at him and I'm like, there's no way we are the same anything. He is a superhero in real life. That's what he
Yeah.
is. And just seeing that, I'm like, oh my God, this is the craziest thing I've ever seen. But like I said, just getting to see how kind of you get to meet a hero, right?
Yeah.
And with LeVar Burton in particular, so like I said, Shaq was on this podcast, and anytime they would flub up or somebody would mess up, they would play the Reading Rainbow. Take a look, it's in a book, Reading
Right.
Rainbow. So Shaq would stutter through an ad or something like that. So I'm from that same generation where Reading Rainbow was always on. Mr. Rogers was always on, right?
Oh
There was
yeah.
always something along those lines. And this is probably, I've been doing this show for over 2 years now. That's the first time anybody's only brought up or has ever brought up LeVar, but also has brought up Captain Planet. And I'm so glad it happened, man, because that was one of those shows that you got made fun of for liking.
Oh
But
yeah.
now everybody, you see a Captain Planet t-shirt. I'm like, I'm pretty sure it's like these 12-year-olds are wearing Nirvana t-shirts. What's your favorite Nirvana song? Who's Nirvana? You dumb dumb. You're wearing their shirt, man. So I'm
It's
glad.
so funny because Captain Planet wasn't a show that I actively liked, but I definitely watched it like
Yes.
every day. Like I have like memories of like watching it with my brother, like watching the show, being totally like on the edge of my seat for like all the shit that's happening in the show. Like it's so funny. But I do, when I got to like reapproach those characters for OK K.O, I did realize like, oh, I have a huge soft spot for this show, and like I definitely have like a ton of nostalgia for it. So yeah, it was funny. Yeah, it was funny. Yeah, back in the day, people would definitely make fun of that show like all the time because it was seen as so lame, But I don't know.
Absolutely.
I really did have a soft spot for it.
I think he might have been the first superhero with a mullet too. So I
Oh
don't know
yeah,
if that's true, but I know. I mean, Guy Gardner, when he was the Green Lantern, he kind of had a mullet. But you
right.
know, uh, with that one, in particular, was there any actors that you wanted to work with that the network kind of shot down, or anybody you reached out to that just never returned that phone call?
It's funny that you mention Mr. Rogers because so we didn't, of course, he's passed on,
Mhm.
but we had wanted to use a clip of him talking
Mhm.
for one of our last episodes. He had a like a song, is more like a poem that I remember like from when I was a kid. It was like, what do you do with the mad that you feel?
Yeah.
And like I was a kid. I like, I was a terror, at when I was little. I used to throw tantrums. I was like, I don't know, I had some like, I was hyperactive. I was like very like, I don't know, my parents sometimes didn't know what to do with me. But I do remember like there was that poem from Mr. Rogers, and I had it on a tape, and it used to like calm me down a little bit, like a VHS that we had taped of it. And we wanted to put a clip from that. This was like a personal memory to me, and I
Mhm.
wanted to put a clip of that into the final episode because in the final episode, it all kind of comes down to that. It's like, when you're a kid and you have complicated feelings and you're kind of having a tantrum, what do, to get yourself out of that mindset. And so we wanted to use a clip of that poem. Um, but his estate actually turned us down. They
Damn,
were
that
just
sucks.
like, I can't remember how they put it. They were just like, oh, we want to make sure that, we keep this really close to the chest, and we don't want it to be in too many things. And to be fair, um, I think they probably made the right choice because when Mr. Rogers talked about, the kind of, you know, violent, crazy cartoons that were on opposite his show, he
Yeah.
could have been, he might have been describing my show. I don't know if it was the right move for his brand to be associated with it. So I think they made the right choice.
Well, in hindsight, man, I kind of wish they would have been a little bit more open, man, and you could have got to do that because that's something special. Whenever you can take something from your personal life and you can kind of weave it into and you can share it with other people, not only does it mean more, but you can cut through all of the bullshit and you're like, this dude, this chick, this person, man, they fucking love what they do and they want to share that love with everybody else, man. And I think that's really something special. And that's something that I've noticed with your generations, and I'm throwing your generation there, like you, Penn, JG, your wife Rebecca. You guys, I look at these shows and there's so much more than just a cartoon, and that's no diminishing. I'm a huge fan of the '90s, the early 2000s, the mid 2000s. I get shit on a lot because I'll sit there and say, oh, these new cartoons just aren't great. Yes and no, right? Because people just take shit out of context. Do I like
Sure.
as many of the shows now as I did back then when I was a kid? No. And everybody will say that when you're an adult.
Right.
Everything that you watched as a kid was so much better than what kids watch now. That's what everybody pretty much says. But I see these shows now, and you guys are putting messages in there like this, like inclusivity. I hope I said that correctly because I have this habit of like just fucking words up. But this acceptance for people, no matter race, fucking sex, no matter what it is, man, there's so many things that make us the same. And I think that's something very, very cool because it says something when you can sit there and look at a screen and say, I see myself in that character. regardless of what they look like, what they sound like, what they do,
Right.
what they don't do. I see myself in that character, and that's something that like I said, I've noticed a lot more in the last decade of cartoons than I did in maybe the previous 20 years. But maybe it's just because I wasn't looking at it from a different perspective like I do now, man. Having boys, having a girl on the way, it kind of opens up your field of vision. Like, it's just not one way, man. There's so many avenues for so many different types of stories that we haven't heard. And like I said, I really appreciate what you guys and gals are doing these days with these cartoons, man. So I kind of got sidetracked there with your fanning out, man, but I appreciate you sharing those stories with me. The first thing
Of
I thought
course.
of when you were telling me about LeVar was, if you ever watched the Community with Donald Glover, where LeVar Burton guest spots on there, and then, Donald Glover's a huge fan of LeVar Burton. He's just staring at him the entire time. He doesn't know what to say, doesn't know what to do. First thing he says, he's like, "Don't let him talk to me." And then he comes up, sits next to him, and talks to him. He's like, and then he runs away. That's what I imagined when you were telling me the story. I was waiting for you to say that, but
For sure. For sure.
yeah. So kicking it back, man. So you should work on this little show called Venture Bros, excuse me.
Yes.
So without going super, super in detail into how you got there, man, what was it? What was your experience like? Because you were on there for a little while.
So okay, so I can give a short version of like how I got there, but I uh so that show was made at okay, so right now that show's made at Titmouse.
Mhm.
Before that it was made at a animation studio called World Leaders Entertainment, which before that was called Noodle Soup Productions. When I know it's kind of a wacky name, but I think their one of their founders was called Jeff Noodleman or something, so it's called Noodle Soup. I interned there, and this was like during college, and I had I had a decent internship there. They wanted me to stay on. I went and I did like my final film for college. I came back. They were like, "Hey, do you want to like help us out with stuff?" So I would do like small little like freelance jobs, and I eventually started doing some animation direction for them on a show. It was like a show like that nobody's heard of. It's called Super Normal. It was like a show for kids. I think it aired in the UK, and I was doing animation direction, and the new season of Venture Brothers was about to start up, and they were like, "Hey, we need another animation director." And so I take a test for it, and I just it wasn't like a thing that I had like the skills to do it. And when I talk about animation direction, I'm talking about using X sheets, which is like basically it's like a spreadsheet for every single frame in a cartoon and what happens on that frame, and like which poses each character should hit on each frame, stuff like that. And I tried it out. It was really fun. uh and then I got a lot of help doing it, and then they had me on the crew, and it was great because we basically got to sort of all the action that happened, all the like fun stuff that would happen. The creator of the show would sit down with us and sort of go through an episode. Um, he would go through an episode with us and sort of explain, oh, these are the things that happened in the episode. This is kind of how I want this action to go. These characters are talking to each other. This is what I think is funny about it. And we would just sort of take that information and just like interpret that into the actions that were going on in the episode. And I remember I just had a lot of fun, like learning a lot about like character acting, storyboarding, like how a show is made and how it's put together, like the editing, sending shows, like animating, like doing the direction, sending it off to get animated, seeing it come back and being like, "Oh, why did I do that?" Like stuff like that. It was really fun.
So where do you feel the most fulfillment? Obviously, you've done pretty much everything as far as from nuts to bolts, start to finish for a show. I mean, you created your own show. You helped bring, with Rebecca, Steven Universe. You worked on Adventure Time, Venture Brothers, or Adventure Bros. I keep saying brothers because I'm dumb. But anyways, so what's most satisfying for you? Is it storyboarding? Is it directing? Is it editing? Is it animating? Is it voice work? What do you feel the most fulfillment from?
Hmm. I think the thing is, uh, I don't know if I don't know if I find fulfillment in a single discipline. I think the thing that is most fun for me, is the places where those jobs overlap,
Mhm.
and you get to have a conversation that you never thought you would have, uh with another member of the team to figure something out. Like, I remember there was like an Adventure Time episode called All the Little People, where it was just like tons and tons of like tiny versions of the characters all on screen at once, like 50 to 100 of them on screen at once. And I remember like having to talk, like me and the designer Andy Rustino having to like sort of figure out like how many people is on here, like is it 100, is it 1,000, like having those discussions on like how do we then like put all these characters on the screen, how do you design all these, like doing the drawings together. Like, those moments of like collaboration are really, really fun. That's the stuff that I like really love. Like, I also, another job I really loved was being a storyboard revisionist.
Yeah.
And that's when you're kind of going through a storyboard and you're sort of checking for, you know uh like mistakes, making sure that the continuity makes sense, like that kind of stuff. I love that job because it's very interactive. Sometimes people would come to you and they'd be like, oh, I need you to draw like, you know I remember there's one episode where it was on Adventure Time when Jake wasn't in the episode for the whole episode, and we were like, and they were like, how are we gonna get Jake in this episode? And then at the very end, it was like, hey Finn, what's that pocket on your shirt? And Jake was inside the pocket, and then he farted. And I remember like everybody laughed, but then it was like, wait a minute, this means that we have to put a pocket on Finn's shirt for the whole episode. So you get like a stack of paper, and it's like, put pockets on all these fins, like, stuff like that, like random stuff like that. Like, people be like, oh, like I'm doing like this crazy like VR 360 scene, like I need you to draw the characters like rotating around, and like sometimes it'd be like technical stuff, sometimes it's just like, I don't know, there were like so many different things, like, oh, there needs to be like an explosion on this page, can you draw like a huge explosion or something. Like, it was just really fun.
Yeah, that's really cool, man. And Adventure Time, it's one of those shows that I wish I could go back. Maybe I have to wait 10 years, kind of like I did with Samurai Jack, where I go back and I watched it in its entirety as a kid. And then, last or 2021, when my youngest son was born, I watched Samurai Jack whenever my wife would go and take a shower. I'd sit there with the baby and watch an episode, and then she'd come out, give her the baby, and then I'd get in the shower. So I'd watch an episode every night, and it felt like I was watching the show for the first time again. So maybe I got to do that with Adventure Time, because that's such a special time in my life, watching that show and having fun with that, and then just getting to hear the people that have worked on it, that have talked about what a game changer that one was, for animation in general. I mean, everybody wanted a SpongeBob when SpongeBob came out, everybody wanted a Samurai Jack, everybody wanted Adventure Time, everybody wanted Steven Universe. There's these pivotal moments in animation history where they kind of pushed culture, they pushed the animation so far, and then everybody's looking for the next X, Y, and Z. So before we jump off Adventure Bros, man, I got to imagine with that one kind of being, was that the first one at Cartoon Network that you got your feet wet on?
Yeah, and I wasn't actually working like in Cartoon Network because it was done at another studio in New
Mhm.
York. But it was for Cartoon Network, and that I really felt like, well, it's not gonna get better than this,
Yeah.
it's not gonna get bigger than this, you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's pretty cool too, man. Because I've heard such great things about the cast, the crew, and then just how hard everybody worked on that show. Um, as you start to transition from there, I got to imagine that you picked up something at least pretty cool or something you might still use on a day-to-day basis, whether it's knowledge, whether it's timing, whether it's something that you kind of learned from Doc and Chris. But does anything stick out as far as what you might have learned or what you might have picked and what you might still use from your experience on the Venture Bros?
Oh man, so much. I mean, that was the show that I learned how a animated show was made.
Mm-hmm.
And gosh, I'm really trying to figure out like a specific thing. Oh, there is something. Something that I always really admired, um, that I always really admired the creators for was, you know, they did their whole season one. It was like it looked one way because of sort of the the budget limitations at the time. They did season two that looked a certain way. They had a thing where like, if they didn't like how something looked, like if they didn't like a character design or like a background style or something, they knew how to make it better, they would just change it.
Yeah.
They wouldn't stick with something just to stick with it,
Mm-hmm.
for the sake of, oh, well, that's the way the backgrounds look, so we just have to stick with the backgrounds looking that way. They actually let themselves sort of like evolve the show, and even like the tone of the show and the way that the characters were, like everything got to evolve and have this like uh there was like this nice steady like change and improvement of like the characters, the artwork, the storytelling. I think like that's something that like I always really admired because I think it's easy to sort of just like get into a rut and sort of be like, this is the way it's supposed to be, and this is the way I learned how to do this, so I'm just going to keep it like this.
Yeah.
But they were always constantly like evolving things, even taking characters and like reinventing them, stuff like that. Like, they were just really good at that. And I think that's something that I definitely always aspired to, for sure.
Absolutely, man. If you're not growing, you're dying. So it's very something.
Absolutely.
And a lot of people have a hard time kind of changing or trying to evolve or trying to progress. So, getting to see that at such a young and pivotal age or pivotal point in your young animation career at that time, I got to imagine, like you said, it left an impression on you because you still use it today.
Absolutely.
Transitioning into another, like I said, man, every show you've worked on, I'm just blown away, dude. It's just from the storytelling to the animation to the voice acting to just hit, and I can't wait for your next hit is what I'm getting at, man, because I got to imagine one's coming soon. I got to imagine you got one in your back pocket. You're just cock locked and ready to rock, man. But Adventure Time, like I said, this one game changer right out the bat, and you were there. I mean, what was
Yeah.
it like working with Penn? What was it like working on Adventure Time? How was this one stacked up coming from Venture Bros?
So, Adventure Time, it was crazy because I came on the show before it came out, and um, it's weird to think about. Yeah, it's almost weird. It's hard for me to think about Cartoon Network before Adventure Time,
Yeah.
because in those years it was like they they had a couple shows, but it seemed like, oh, is anything ever gonna really hit,
Mhm.
the way that like say like Powerpuff Girls like hit, you know what I mean? I think that was like a little bit of the question. And I remember, I don't know, I can't remember if Brian Miller got into it in his interview, but I remember when I got there at Cartoon Network, people were talking like oh, I don't know, maybe the studio won't work out, like I don't know, hopefully we have another show that's a big hit or something. And then I remember like when Adventure Time came out, it was still the time when it was like appointment viewing. You had to like be there like on Thursday, or I think it was Monday and then Thursday. Oh no, it was Har Thursday. So I think it started on Thursday, then they eventually moved to Monday, and like you had to be there and you had to watch it, and people were watching it every week, and they were trying to like figure out the mystery behind the world, and it was like this whole thing. And I got to see this show, kind of like become this like whole like phenomenon. um and I loved working on that show. I never storyboarded for that show because uh I mean, the storyboarders on that show are like immensely talented, and like the dialogue on Adventure Time is like, it's like poetry,
Mhm.
you know. It takes like, you know, I mean, this sounds exclusionary, but it takes a certain kind of mind to like really get in the heads of those characters and like really be able to like write that show. I wasn't ready to do that at that time. However, I could draw the characters pretty well. So they hired me as a revisionist, and then eventually I was the storyboard supervisor on that show. And I had so much fun working on that show. There's so many like little like subtle details that just make that world feel alive, that were done for like no reason, you
Mhm.
know, that the audience doesn't even really notice. Like I remember we would have episodes where, you know, the characters are going on these adventures and they seem kind of random and silly, but like as artists we were like thinking like, oh, how long would it take Finn and Jake to get from their house to the Candy Kingdom? Like
Mhm.
maybe by the time they get there it's like sunset, and then when they're leaving it's nighttime. Like we would kind of like try to track the reality that they're in. And like it really like lends this like reality to the show, that I just really really loved, and I just thought everybody working on that show was a genius. Penn Ward, who created the show, um I remember he gave me like some really good advice once. um I was doing like, when I did a storyboard test for the show, he was kind of like, he asked me like, what, you know, what do you think a joke is? Like, what is a joke, you know? And I thought like, oh, a joke, like, you know, set up punchline, like ha ha ha, you know, you laugh at the punchline. And he was sort of like, a joke could be less than that. It could be like a funny drawing. It could be a funny way you get up out of the chair. It could be like the funny way two friends relate to each other. You know, it's not just about going for those hard punchlines. There's also just like the humor in like being alive and being real, you know. And I feel like that's what that show has, you know, and that's why it's so fun to go back to, for sure.
That's such a deep question to ask to what is a joke? And until you said that, it's just I would have just probably said the same thing you did. But then I
Yeah.
start thinking, so I work in a kitchen, so seeing somebody, especially now, we're on 14, 16-hour days because it's
Mm,
the week before Thanksgiving, and then Thanksgiving's crazy. So we're just trying to feed as many people as we can for that day. But generally, about Thursday, which is today, everybody kind of starts to crack and break. It's kind of funny. It's sad, but it's kind of funny to see too, especially if it isn't
right.
you. So you're just sitting there and you're watching, and then the person I was working with goes and they had an entire pan of flour, right? And then they just weren't thinking, turned, and then somehow it slipped out of their hands. And then it falls, flour shoots up. They literally look up, they look up, they look down, and then they look over, and then they just don't say anything to anybody, and then they just walk off. And then nothing was said. So there was no setup, there's no
Yeah.
punchline. It was just the intent, the aggravation of the entire moment, and then just seeing it
Yeah.
all kind of cascade and end with, fuck, I don't make enough money for this. I'm just gonna walk away for 5 minutes before I burn the place down. There's just something funny about that whole situation. And until, like I said, until you said that about the joke, like I said, it's such a deep question to ask. Um, is there
Yeah,
anything?
I always think about that, like, because like once I heard that, I was like, you know, even going back, I realized, oh, there's so many things about like even Looney Tunes that I thought were funny, that were really just the way that the characters acted and the way that they interacted, and that was humor. You know, it wasn't just like a straight, you know, stand-up comedy, like it's a joke, you know. It's
Yeah,
like there's a whole world of humor out there.
there absolutely is. And then I'm so glad we keep coming back to Looney Tunes, but it was just something about those characters. And I've been trying to figure it out what it was about these characters, right? I believe it was in Chuck Jones's book, Chuck-a-Muck, where he said somebody, maybe it was his grandmother, but he was like, hey, I'm going to get to, write for, Bugs Bunny or something like that. And then the lady was like, what do you mean write for Bugs Bunny? He doesn't need a writer. He's going to say whatever it was. It was this conditional moment where it's like the character is real. You don't have to write for a character. You don't have to write for a real person. It's not a character. So it's just,
Yeah.
it's interesting that we have this way of looking at a character, especially like the Looney Tunes, because like you said, it's just like you've got some Disney characters in there you can say are top tier. But I think, in my opinion, it's the same thing as the Looney Tunes. It's like that's the bar, that's what was set. I don't think anything's ever going to surpass those characters as far as the writing, the animation, just the little idiosyncrasies that they all have that make them tick, but make them unique in the same sense, right? So it's just a fascinating thing, a fascinating show. But Adventure Time, man. Is there a moment during your entire career with Adventure Time that you're most proud of that you look back on and say, man, we crushed it on this one?
Oh man. Uh oh, it's okay, so I think it was the second season finale, Mortal Folly and Mortal Recoil. And I absolutely loved working on those shows. I was doing revisions on those shows, and I remember putting my all into like both of those episodes because they were like so cool. You finally got to see like the Lich King. I remember being just like I remember like when those episodes came back from overseas being animated, I was just like, this is gonna blow people's minds. There's so many though. Like I was just so happy to be a part of it. Um, the first Fiona and Cake episode, that was super fun to be a part of. There were so many. I wish I could remember every single one, but it's like all of those episodes were so fun. There were so many like little random things within the episodes that like little moments that we got to work on. And I remember Penn used to say, you know, oh, if there's one moment in an episode that makes you smile, it's a that means that episode's a winner, you know? And I always felt like that was true, like with every single episode.
Dude, hearing the stories about Penn, it's such a fast, there's characters or there's people that come along in this world that it's just like, fuck, man, you're just way too brilliant. You're way too smart. And that's not a dig on anything. It's just like it's seeing how somebody can look at something and
Yeah,
tweak it just a little bit. And then you're like, dude, you took this from like a solid C to an A plus plus, right?
right.
It's fascinating. Kind of the same thing with Doc and Chris, but with Penn. Obviously, he kind of opens your mind a little bit about what a joke is. So it's seeing how a character reacts with whatever's going on around him or anything like that. What were some of the things that you might have pulled from Penn that you still use today in your career?
Definitely the power of funny drawings.
Yeah.
And he, you know, he had a philosophy where it's like sometimes a drawing can be a little bit wrong or a little bit weird looking, but if it's funny, like then it stays, you know? And it's just like this is funny. You know, you love the way it looks and you just like laugh at it. And I remember that was like a huge thing. I remember learning from him just like the power of a funny drawing, you
Yeah.
know, is immortal, you know.
Yeah. That's really cool, man. Um, what was with Adventure Time? And this is probably the last question for Adventure Time, and then we'll do a little bit of a wrap up. But for Adventure Time, I got to imagine that everybody's probably going to ask you, you know, who was your favorite character to draw, or who was your favorite character to animate, man. But let's take it a step further. Was there a character? It might not have been your favorite character, but was there a character that felt like putting on a comfortable pair of shoes? Like you knew everything about that character from the way they would talk, the way they would act, the way they would think.
I mean, it's Jake
Yeah.
because Jake he can stretch into anything. He's just like super chilled out. He is really zen and he's also really sensitive and friendly and you just want a best friend like him.
Yeah.
And he's also super fun to draw because he's got like a super funny looking face
Mhm.
and his face stays the same but his body changes. And those were like that was like my favorite character to draw when I was working on Adventure Time, just because he's just one of those he's just like a loaf. He's easy to draw but he's fun to draw and he's so funny. And everything about the character was just great. I loved how he like, you know, Finn was kind of neurotic, and Jake just sort
Just
of
a
like
little.
let everything go, and like the thing I really loved about Jake was just that, you know, when he was talking about like how he was gonna die someday, and he had fully accepted it, and he was just cool with it. I was like, that is an amazing character. He was great. Yeah.
That's awesome, man. Was it? So this one's always an interesting question whenever something comes up like that. Like if you can take a character and you can twist and turn him. I got to imagine, just trying to make each other laugh. You might have taken Jake and turned him into something funny. But does anything stick out to you that you tried to get in that the network said, nah, you really can't make him do that?
I wonder. The only thing I remember, um, one of the things I remember that like we couldn't get through is we couldn't have the characters say murder or like murdered. And then and that actually became really funny because there was like a murder mystery train episode, but we couldn't actually say the word murder in the episode. So it just turned into weird words like, oh, he got moitered or myrtle or like something. And it actually became like a lot funnier. Yeah, that's one thing I can remember. I wonder if there were any forbidden Jake transformations. I don't know. I'd have to check in with some old friends about that.
You remember Cow and Chicken?
Oh yeah, I
So
loved Cow and Chicken.
do you remember the pilot?
Yeah. Oh
There's no,
yeah.
there was no smoking.
Yeah. No smoking.
You
And
couldn't.
and the red guy was actually called the devil.
And he walked on his ass.
Yeah.
When I had David Feast on, the creator of Cow and Chicken, because I asked him, and it's the same thing with Craig. So with Powerpuff, Craig McCracken, excuse me. So with Powerpuff Girls, they couldn't use the term the devil, right? It's the same
Right.
thing. That's why they had to call him the red guy after. And it was the
Right.
same thing with Craig. So he drew a character that resembled the devil, but they couldn't call it the devil, so he called it him.
Right. Him.
And
Yeah.
I was like, dude, that doesn't make any sense. And he was like, really? And I was like, yeah, I mean, not only was the red guy butt naked, he walked on his butt cheeks. So he made twerking a thing before twerking was a thing, right? So there's that one. And I was like, two, he was trying to get a fucking chicken to smoke a cigarette the
Yeah.
entire show. That was the whole point of the show. And I was like, you couldn't call him the devil, but you could get him to sell cigarettes. The Marble Man
Yeah.
was on Cow and Chicken, and you could get butt cheeks on there, dude. That doesn't make any
Yeah.
fucking sense. So it's just wild to see what they pick at and what they let through and what they don't let through.
Yeah,
Um,
it's crazy. It's crazy. It's so like inconsistent and so weird. Like on KO we had one where a character was like supposed to shoot sort of like a beam at people, and it was supposed to like disintegrate them, right? And we figured, oh, if they shoot a beam and then the character disappears, we're all good because there's no violence, right?
yeah.
But they were like, no, it's too violent if they disappear. So you have to show the beam hit the character and then like the character fall down and like moan like in pain to show that like they're still alive. And it just became so disturbing because now there's like a room full of characters like lying on the ground, like moaning in pain, And I'm like, that's so much more disturbing than just having the character disappear. But hey, it's your show.
That's like if that would have been me, I would have took it up and just dialed it up a notch, man. Make them real thespians while they're down there moaning and groaning like, oh, just some stupid shit to church that shit up. Well,
Yeah.
like I said, Ian, we're gonna split this one into two episodes if you had fun and you want to come back because there's two
Yeah.
shows in that. Thank you. There's two shows in particular that we got more fans questions for these two in general, and one of them was Steven Universe. I'm pretty sure you're very familiar with that one, and the other one
Yes.
was a little show you might have created. I'm not sure. The OK K.O. I don't know if you know anything about that one, Ian, but we're going to talk about that one too in our second part, as well as all the fans questions, ladies and gentlemen. So make sure you come on back for that one. But like I said, Ian, this has been a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And
I had a great
usually,
time.
thank you. I appreciate that. Usually we do a little bit of a wrap up, and then I say, hey, Ian, if people want to say, hey, I like that thing you did, where are you at on social media so people can go ahead and follow you and check out what you're doing next?
Yeah. So you can find me at Ian. Sorry. Yeah. So you can find me at IanJQ on Twitter and Instagram, and probably on a few other things too.
Mhm.
And yeah, you can just come by and say hi. I don't post that much, but You can say hi when I do.
Beautiful. Well, he's been Ian. I've been Julian. This has been a What's in My Head podcast, and this has been another piece of your childhood. Make sure you tune back in for part 2. Good night.